talking here about the South Fork Big Nemaha Watershed. And we're working on some mapping in the area. My name is Deanna. I'm an engineer. I've been with the Department of Natural Resources for about 5 years. I do a lot of the enhanced studies, make computer models of the rivers and mapping, and I review other people's work. We want to go, Elijah?
Sure. I'm Elijah Kaufman. I'm a certified floodplain manager with Nebraska DNR. The floodplain management section along with Deanna, except rather than doing the mapping or engineering, I'm on the regulation side. So I have the understanding of the flood insurance program and the floodplain regulations for the state of Nebraska. And so I assist communities with running their floodplain programs.
I'm Ryan Stastny. I'm environmental specialist at DNR. So I actually am working on this study for this watershed in this area. So I work with the engineers in our department, work with FEMA, and then I do all our not all of our submittals, but I do submittals as well for FEMA. So.
I'm Asa Braden. I mostly help Elijah with the community outreach and that sort of kind of thing. I'm mostly here to learn the ropes and then kind of move on.
Go ahead.
That Matt Coolman, for the city of Pawnee City, I do their zoning and the floodplain administration.
I'm Terry Winslow. I'm just a board member in Steiner.
Okay.
I just want to know what's going on.
Sure.
And I'm Andy McGrail. I'm with FEMA Region 7. I basically help fund these guys so they can keep making maps for the state of Nebraska. I like.
We're here because we're doing a mapping project in this area. You guys have a maps right now, effective maps, and we're going through and redoing them. So starting from scratch and building new maps. Really, our goal at our department is to make communities more resilient to flood risk. And the ways that we do this is updating your risk. So we update the maps when new engineering methods come out, when we have new data, better data. And then we can provide the communities with accurate maps, or as accurate as we can make them, flood insurance rate maps, firms. And you can use those maps for, permitting, but then you can also use those maps just to assess what your risk is in your community. So we'll talk about why this area needs maps. We'll talk about how we make the maps. We'll talk about what we need from you guys. And then we'll just get into the timeline and then what you can do once you have your maps, or what you can do right now with your current maps. We'll just keep going. We update the maps because flood risk changes. Also, we get new data. So a lot of the maps in this area haven't been done since 2005. That's pretty old for our maps. In 2005, we were using contours a lot for these kinds of things. So it was like 5-foot or 10-foot contours. And now we have better data. We use an elevation map flown with LiDAR. So we actually have an airplane fly over the area with the laser and it gets elevation. So it's pretty accurate data. We also have new methods, better methods of estimating the flow and the elevation of the water. So engineering methods change. We don't, I think, have any paper maps in this area, but this is what a paper map looks like. They're hard to read. We're switching everything over to digital. And you will have, did you have paper maps before? Was it kind of a knowing? They're rough.
And then the colors on the legends don't match the colors on the maps.
Yeah. And then we have them digitized, but they're not always exactly correctly georeferenced. So it's hard to guess. And our new maps will be more detailed like this, where you can see the water kind of go up the creek or backwater or go down the streets. So hopefully it's closer to what the actual flooding would look like. So just like your old maps, these new maps will be used to determine whether or not someone is in the floodplain if they have a federally backed mortgage. So if that's the case, they'll need a floodplain permit and then they'll have to pay flood insurance. And then you can use, these maps will be part of your city ordinances. So we'll get into this a little bit. If you guys have more questions, you can certainly ask, but map development, we start with the base map. So that has like the roads, we get those from the census data. We get an aerial imagery, And then a big part of that is we have political boundaries. So we have the boundary of your community and then what we call an ETJ, an extraterritorial jurisdiction. So that's what we get from you guys. And that's something in the next, couple months, if you want to look at our map that we have online and see if that matches what you think it should. Sometimes we get people that are like, oh, we had a development east of town and we added it, but then our department never heard about it. So we just need to know if the boundary looks okay. And if it doesn't, you can send us a shape file if you're good at GIS, or you can send us a CAD file, or you can even just print out a map of your community and with a Sharpie, draw it in, and we'll do our best to make it into a layer on our file. That's kind of what I just talked about with base map. So we'll keep going. So this is the boundary of the watershed. The South Fork Big Nemaha Watershed. All of this area will get new effective maps. It'll all be zone A, a basic study. We call them basic studies because we don't include the structures and the bridges when we do them, but they're not necessarily that basic. We have Ryan's working on them. It's a human looks at every confluence of the river. We don't include bridges, but we do try to make it so the mapping around the bridges looks nice. And we have a computer program that helps us do it, but there's a lot of human input just to make sure that we're making the best product that we can. All of our mapping is done in-house, which is, well, not all the mapping for this watershed will be done in-house, which is not necessarily what other states do. So we take a lot of time and a lot of care to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for you guys. We map any stream after it starts to drain 1 square mile. So that's kind of how we decide at the end, like when to stop mapping effectively. You can go to the next slide. This is kind of, this whole area will be zone A. Sometimes we do an AE study. But since we don't have that in this area, I don't think we need to talk about it unless you have a question about it. So zone A study, one other thing about it is the elevations, you'll have to continue to request a base flood elevation for permitting. So zone AE studies will have the elevations tied to them and you don't have to request a BFE, but with this one, you'll still request a BFE and BFEs will continue to be a free service from the state of Nebraska. Other states charge, so we provide that as a service.
I'm one of the people that does those.
Yeah. You do them for free, right? We don't pay him when he does them. So hydrology is just a fancy word for how much water goes through a stream. When we do hydrology, we look at 6 different types of storms. We go all the way from a 10-year storm to a 500-year storm. And we have 2 ways in that we usually do this. We can look at a gauge, and if we have a gauge, that's our preference. And we can do an analysis to figure out all those different storms from that gauge. If we don't, we have what's called a regression equation, which is just a big old fancy equation that has lots of different things that takes into account how much water that area is draining, what the land is like, what the banks are like, what the slope is like. So it's just a whole big old equation, and then it spits out a number. And we do have different equations that we use for the state, and an engineer will check to make sure that we're using an appropriate equation for this area. Hydraulics is just a fancy word for how high the water is. So once we get how much water is going down the river, we can use that to get a depth of the river, and then we just take our LiDAR, our elevation map, plus the depth, and now we have the water surface elevation. Any questions? This area will get flood risk data. And these are pretty cool little tools that you can use. They're not regulatory. The boundaries of them will line up with your regulatory map, but they're not something that you would use for regulatory purposes. It's more for like informing the public. So if you go to the next slide, sometimes we have people who think, oh, I'm in the floodplain, but it doesn't flood here. We get that a lot. having the depth grid, we find can be kind of helpful, because people hear flood and they think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be on my roof. I'm gonna have to be rescued. And we're like, well, no, a flood can be, just a foot of water. So if you have something like this and it says, okay, it's gonna be half a foot of water, you're like, okay, that'd be like my doorstep or, my first step or something. So it kind of helps with public buy-in a little bit. It also, I like on this map, you can see there's like an old channel of the river, like an old oxbow up there. You can see that our data is good enough that we're catching these kinds of things, that area is a little bit lower, so it will be deeper. I think it helps people if they're a little suspicious of the mapping. With this, we also have the percent of flooding. So the 100-year floodplain, we say has, if you're in the 100-year floodplain, you have at least a 1% chance every year of flooding. But that's at least. So if you're closer to the river, it's a higher chance. That same house has a 4% chance of flooding every year. So it kind of helps people gauge what the risk is of buying there. If they're looking at a property, you can show this. And these are all free, available on our website to anybody. But we think they're kind of interesting tools. It's also interesting for like if you're developing a critical facility, if you have like you're putting in a new, you want a place to keep your fire trucks, new firehouse. You think, okay, I should probably put it on the other side of that big floodplain, because if we put it all the way to the edge, you're going to have trouble getting over that river if it's flooding and there's a fire. They can kind of help you plan your development a little bit. In the next slide, the modeling approach letter. So that's the big scary letter that you guys got. Yeah. And we usually have questions on those just because it's written in a way that might be a little confusing. Effectively, what it's trying to tell you is that you are getting new maps, and we are going to, in this area, we're going to use a zone A one-dimensional method, which is pretty much our standard method. And that was what I was talking about, the basic mapping that Ryan's working on. So it's basic, but it is a lot of computer and human interaction, and it is being reviewed. It'll be reviewed a couple times by different engineers, by different people. So that's just letting you know that's the method that we're going to do in this area.
Those are supposed to be done next year.
So we'll get to that, but it's a long process. We'll have, right now, there are maps that you can view on our website, but we're revising those quite a bit. We started from scratch. There were some areas that we found it just wasn't quite, it just didn't seem right. So we've started over. Ryan's working on it, got our best minds on the team on it, and we're putting that together. So the flood risk review meeting is when you'll get a chance to look at those, and that won't be until spring of 2024. And then the maps won't be effective until maybe like the 26th. So you've got quite some time. But this letter, you're supposed to provide feedback for. So FEMA gives, we're supposed to do a 30-day kind of thing for that. The deadline to provide comments on that letter is October 1st. So if you take that to the board and you say, okay, this is what they're doing, they're going to do a one-dimensional analysis, which is what we usually do. So we use cross sections, and then a one-dimensional analysis assumes that from this cross section to this cross section, all of the water just goes this way. So there's not water that gets lost or water that wanders off or whatever. It's just boom to boom, which is what we usually do. And then also just make sure that the contact information in there is right. If we misspelled a name or got an address wrong or something, let us know. Sorry.
But they're required to do that based on the Code of Federal Regulations. That's part of our new regulations that require them to send out so that you guys are aware of what modeling techniques are going into place.
Yeah. So you can stop me for a moment, but basically the way I understand is that a while ago, there wasn't as much interaction between, us and the
Oh, I can
community.
tell this story all day long. I've been doing this for 17 years.
So there's a push now with FEMA to have more, we're going to let you know every step of where it's going, where we're at, just so it's not like dumping on you. Here's your maps.
It was at a point where unless you were having a detailed or an enhanced study, you did not get to basically say anything about it. That was just how it was. Now, you get the ability to comment throughout the period on any streams that are touched. Both A zone, which is our base study, and our enhanced study. So that's what that transition was. That happened a while ago. That happened back in 2009, 2010.
So, yeah, if there's anything you wanna let us know, any kind of comment that'll go into like the official record or whatever, but. Really, I think. Looking at the contact information would be helpful for us. Okay, so we got here, now it comes to the part of what we're looking for from you guys. As you're looking at your maps or, when they come out or as you're thinking about this process. Let us know if there's any areas that you've experienced significant flooding. If you have mapping right now that isn't. You can look at your effective maps now and say, okay, this area flooded a lot in 2019 or in the last big flood. And then we can look into that closer. If there's any areas where there's repeated loss. Think about those and let us know if there's any areas that you're concerned about that, like, okay, this area floods all the time. I really want to make sure they should be in the maps. We're using LiDAR that was flown in 2018. So if you've had any big development since then, you can let us know about that because our LiDAR our elevation data won't have captured that. And then if you've had any studies done in the area, if JEO came in or HDR came in and did a drainage study, or you resized your culverts or something like that, we can look at that and take that information and just compare it to what we have, or if it's better data, we can just, we'd love to have more information and then decide, how we can use that. And a big part of that again is the ETJs and the corporate boundaries. And you can email any of us on our team and you can tear out a page in the phone book with a map, they still have those, and take a Sharpie and mail it to us. If you want,
I don't know the last time I've seen a phone.
right? I know.
You guys aren't from around here.
I'd say, you said that you were laughed about 2 weeks ago in the office. The two girls in there were looking up on every, billing software for everything, trying to find this person's phone number. It was like, grab this little book and say,
And then, if you have any as-built or any kind of information I think might be important to us, we'll certainly take a look at whatever you give us. High water marks, if there was a big flood that came through that somebody had a mark on their barn and you want to get a survey of it, and we can compare that to our data and just see if we're, in the ballpark. That would be great too. Anything that you can give us would be great. Do we want to watch the video? Sure. Let's watch the video.
Denver is a very active community. People come here because they love the open spaces. The best part of my job is getting to see the final product, like Confluence Park. This park provides an experience with nature for people who live in an urban setting.
Rivers and streams add charm to a city, but they also bring a risk of flooding.
I don't think people understand the potential flood threat associated with this area and the fact that a portion of this park is really done as a mitigation to that threat.
Denver's Urban Drainage Flood Control District is constantly looking at flood risk data and working on ways to make the community safer. One way they do this is by using the latest data to update their local flood maps so the community understands its flood risk.
When we are going through a floodplain mapping process, we reach out to the public and look for anecdotal evidence that they might have so that we have the best information in the maps that FEMA ends up using.
As flood maps are developed, FEMA and the community work together to gather the most accurate data. Communities can provide input on areas of flooding concern early in the process, so they build the map together.
We know our streams, we know our communities, and so we bring local knowledge to the mapping process.
This also makes the process more efficient and cost-effective for everyone. Communities don't need to wait for FEMA. They can start an update at any time with a community-initiated map revision.
It was about 1996. We had a very heavy snowfall. The small creek, Mercer Creek, overflowed and filled our neighborhood several blocks in each direction. The water was about 3 feet deep in front of my house. The flood 20 years ago came slowly enough that we were able to move out of harm's way. But when it happened this year, I woke up at 6 in the morning and I had 18 inches of water in the house.
Because flooding is so common here, Kittitas County has a lot of new flood data. The community partnered with FEMA to update its flood maps.
We are in a very active process now of updating those maps. We just finished 200 miles of remapping. That was through FEMA's mapping process. We're supplementing that with our high resolution digital maps. If you, as a resident, believe that this map is inaccurate and you have a high water mark on your farm, we can go out and survey it and we can use that elevation to decide whether or not our map's accurate. So that anecdotal information is extremely important.
Updating flood map is highly encouraged. Communities that take an active role as they go through the map update process help make their map as current and precise as possible.
These maps really give us a better idea of what that extent of flooding is going to be when it happens to us. They empower people to make much better decisions about the most important investment in their lives, their homes.
Want to learn more about collaborating on your community's flood map? Get more details at FEMA.gov/mitigation.
Okay. So we'll get into mitigation a little bit. Mitigation is just kind of the step, okay, we've talked about why you need maps, we talked about how we make the maps, now what do you do with it? And there's different ways, obviously, there's reasons that managing your flood risk makes sense. Decreasing the cost of flood insurance, you can do that through the CRS program. Are you guys familiar with that at all? No. The CRS program, and maybe Elijah can talk about it a little bit, but there's a program where there's different levels, and the more kind of goals that you hit, the reduction in floodplain insurance policies there are, and that's for the whole community.
It's a community rating system.
I don't, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it's called. Know exactly what.
And a lot of communities in Nebraska can get to the entry level, right? Just with the basic Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska has a lot of standards that go above and beyond FEMA's national standards for floodplain management, such as a 1 foot freeboard for residential structures having to elevate 1 foot above. I'm sure you've probably worked with that before, but that, I mean, those higher standards in and of themselves, pretty much every community in Nebraska can join the community rating system at the entry level class for a 5% discount on flood insurance.
So it's just like you're doing what you already do, but there's a little bit of paperwork. Is it a lot of paperwork? I don't know.
It's an annual report that they have to submit.
Okay.
But it's just once a year. Type thing.
And that, yeah, that 5% goes to every single policy in your community. Okay, so ways to mitigate. First bubble is prevention. You wanna advance the slide? That's just the planning, that kind of stuff that you do if there's a community or if there's a building that somebody that wants to build in the floodplain, then you issue the permit. Stormwater management, drainage, those kinds of things. Public information, that's outreach, making sure that people know that our maps are available. Maybe those flood risk products, let people know that those exist. Property protection, so that includes acquisition, going in and actually buying the properties that are in the floodplain and maybe turning those into open space. If you have grass along a channel, it will slow down the water a little bit, which will make the elevation go down generally. But it reduces the damage that floods cause, certainly. And there's other elevation, so that's just requesting a base flood elevation, elevating above the floodplain, getting out of the problem. And then we do allow some flood proofing. There's some different stuff with that's possible as well. The natural resources protection, that's kind of the natural ways, restoring the channels back to what they were before people straightened them and built right to the edges of them. So wetlands and grassed waterways, those can all encourage water to go back into the ground. It also slows things down. It can help the communities downstream. So it's generally a good way, a cheaper way potentially to reduce some of that risk. Emergency services, looking at when there is a flood, how are you going to let people know what's going on? Making sure your critical facilities, your hospitals, your firehouses, those kind of places are out of the floodplain or in a place that can get around the community if they need to, if there is a flood. And then like a flood warning system, if you have a text alert on your phone or something, or even a Facebook message. And then structural projects, these can be pretty expensive and might be harder to do, but reservoirs and then channel modification. And then making bridges a little bit bigger can help water from backing up behind them. Beatrice, we use Beatrice as a very good example of a community that's managed its flood risk. They started in the 70s, buying out communities with their own money. Or buying out houses with their own money and turning them into parks. They had been flooded quite a bit. And that's been very beneficial to the community. FEMA did a study that saw in 2015, $8 million was saved from the damage that could have been caused by that flood. And that last 2019 flood was about the same. So, and it's a nice little area if you've been to Beatrice, and there's dog parks and baseball fields and bike paths and all sorts of nice things, and using the river as an asset to a community instead of like a hazard, really. So the idea with mitigation is doing something before the flood happens. There are grants available. You can reach out to us and we can help if you have an idea of something that can be done. We can see if there's funding available. We don't have a ton of funding through us, but we know of channels and pathways. So you can let any of us know if you have some kind of thing that we can look into or help you with. We're here to help. So project timeline. As we talked a little bit, we're here at the kickoff meeting. We'll have that flood risk review in 2024 probably, and that's when we'll have the maps for you to review. Like I said, the maps that are on our website right now are going to be updated, so expect some changes.
How current are those ones that are on the line?
Well, the effective ones were 2005, and then the flood awareness area that's on there, we had a different company work on it, and we were not as satisfied with them. So now we're taking it in-house because we didn't like the quality of it. This is what happened. And then if effective maps, it could be 2026 before these actually become effective. So we'll have these flood awareness areas, and if you request a base flood elevation, we'll include that on the base flood elevation, both boundaries. But it won't be regulatory. We won't require the people in those areas to have flood insurance with their mortgages until they become effective, potentially in 2026. You've got quite some time. Okay, so here's what we need from you guys in the next coming days. October 1st, let us know if there's anything on that letter that you have any comments on. You can also just send us any questions or whatever. And you can share it with the board or with whomever you want and see if they have any questions. We have on the interactive maps, we have a way that you can provide feedback. If you look at your maps and you think this area never floods, this area always floods, you can leave us a comment and we will look at that. That goes into our official kind of comment record. You can email us, you can call us, you can send a letter.
This, yeah, in the letter, this date, because I have several other members and I know we take care of a lot of it, so.
I don't think
it was.
I don't think it was. It was in something that Michelle sent out. You don't have to comment either. I mean, if you don't comment, then it's a no. Sure. We'll listen.
No, I didn't have the October. It just-
We hear. Okay. So we I think we gave you a little bit of grace, I think. So, but we were 30 days. And if you have a comment after that, we will certainly listen to it. And these maps are still being done. So that's like the official, FEMA regulation 30 days, but we'll still listen to you, if, even next year, if you have something really, it's once things go preliminary, kind of after that next meeting, little bit down the road is when it gets harder to change things. Everything's pretty fluid, right? Fluid, water joke. So our next steps, we're just here to answer your questions, and we will send you way too many emails about the status of everything. You'll get those from Michelle. We're gonna keep working on the mapping. Brian's doing that. And we're just here to answer your questions. If you have any permitting policy kind of things, Elijah's your guy. Anything else you can send to me or any of us and we'll figure it out. We're a small, tight team. There's what, 12 of us now? So if you have a question for one of us, we might end up passing it on, but we'll answer it. Here's our contact information, probably too small to read, but it's also on our website. I thought you were asking a question.
I know. There's a lady, she's way ahead of me, she's got all this down, so I don't have to.
Okay.
She is too.
I probably guess.
Yeah.
Well, you can send us our way. We've heard
She
everything.
takes care of everything.
All right,
No, she's great.
good. Okay.
She definitely does a lot for that.
She takes care of my banking, my mail.
It's your groceries.
She would have by letter.
All right, that's it. If you have any questions. We can show you the maps if you're interested. Our mapping, if are you familiar with it? Or,
Some of it, yeah.
okay. So, here's Pawnee City. Elijah, you can, since you're
Yeah.
driving.
Yeah, okay, so this is on. So. This is on our website. You can access this at any time. You probably used it at dnr.nebraska.gov. And then you just go to the floodplain section following the services tab. This is our floodplain interactive map. That's what I have. And this is an excellent tool to view the floodplain all the way down to your specific address. You can type in your address and see where the floodplain is in relation to you. Currently, I have it showing that. Just going to close that. Okay. Here you can see I've got our community boundary. Why would it open? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll leave that. Okay, currently I have it displaying our community boundaries.
Does that show the 1 mile territorial jurisdiction?
It does. You can see now.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So you'll see the blue outline is your community jurisdiction. The outside is your 1 mile ETJ. And so. Anything that you see that's wrong with this, feel free to send us a copy of your updated boundaries and we'll make sure to get it updated on our map. So.
And this ties,
There's up,
sure,
that's Dina.
that ties to our BFE thing too. So like if you have the jurisdiction to request a BFE, you might not be able to, so because it's all tied to that. So you want to make sure that's correct. If you're trying to request a BFE, that's near the edge of your.
There's no beach.
I don't think our boundaries have changed in the last few years. There you go.
There you go.
We have it as just a.
It's exactly what I have.
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, let us know if anything changes with that. We can get that updated.
And if you're thinking about changing it, it might be the time to do that too.
We don't have any changes in Steiner. We can't even build another house. We don't have
No
property.
No annexes.
We have no places available. People are on a wait list to get into town and can't.
So if it's not in that boundary, it's farm ground.
Really, there's a waiting list. That's crazy.
There's a couple people who like to build a house.
There's no land. Huh. I never thought about that.
And then we also talked a little bit about providing comments, and this is where you can do that. You can email, or you can do it using this website. The first step is to come to these layers. And you turn on the floodplain boundary review comments layer. Turned on that floodplain boundary review comments layer first. And then you have to go to the tool itself. So you open up the More tab. And then there you have that tool, floodplain boundary comments. It'll open up this window on the right side. Feel free to read through this. We have our instructions here for doing this. If you run into any issues, feel free to just call us. But the way you do it is you click on this little icon here, and then that allows you to draw a shape around the area that you have concerns with. So say you have concern with, this area of floodplain, you just click once and it'll start drawing a shape. And then you double click when you're done drawing that shape. And then it will have you enter your information as well as the comment that you have. And then you would click save and submit. So. That's how to do that. Again, if you have any questions while you're doing that, feel free to call us. You can always just email us as well. And we'll do that. So.
That tool's gonna come in really helpful when you guys go into your flood risk review meeting and you've got brand new maps. And you're just walking into the meeting, you see it, don't really have time to go through it. That tool's gonna be immensely helpful when you can look at it and go, wait a minute, we have never seen water here and here and here. And it goes right back to these guys. So they're gonna be able to look at those comments, address them and comment back.
And that's available just on our website to anybody too, so if somebody else has a comment, if there's any, feel free to share it or pass it around if you have. Even like a historian in town who remembers it flooding, sometimes, just whatever.
Property owners that like to argue.
Yeah, we're used to those, we. We get to talk to those people a lot, so we're fine.
And another thing I wanted to show, so when you open this map by default, these flood awareness areas will be turned on. It may not load up in time. There it goes. So it'll be that white hashed pattern. Those are what the maps may look like in the future. Again, we weren't really happy with how it turned out, so we're starting from scratch. So for now, you can probably just ignore them. Just go ahead and switch those off. This solid blue shape is what you want. That's your effective.
So most of these maps identical, like if you look at this map, and you look at the firm map, they basically. the
They'll
same
be,
boundaries.
they'll be.
Yeah, they better be,
They supposed,
yeah,
they better.
They're required.
yeah,
Yeah, so this is more, instead of looking at a piece of paper and trying to figure out, you can zoom, like I said, all the way down to the individual. To see where that floodplain boundary is. So, for interpolation purposes,
So we've
this is
got-
probably the better. tool.
We've got one house down, it's half in and half out.
so then it's.
Nobody can figure out why, because it's just flat as can be from the front of the house. to the back.
I can
Yeah,
tell you,
Just because
Because-
that's all the further the water is.
because the contour that they used to map it was plus or minus 5 feet.
exactly.
That's
We're,
why-
we look at that a lot closer now, like I said,
We have seen.
we look at these super
Yeah.
detailed in town, and that is one thing, like as an engineer, when I'm reviewing them, I hate those. I usually try to make them all in or all out.
Let's say we had another basically block just north there, it's the same way that. 3/4 of block is inside of it, and then the one corner isn't.
Yeah, so yeah, will be, I can look at this and tell you that it's using data that's a little bit older, it's that contour stuff, so. It should be better and,
The LiDAR tolerance is 18 centimeters versus 5.
Ours
You're gonna
is-
have a much better deposit.
the one that we use is 6 inches, like vertical distance, so yeah, it's really good data,
That's the hard part, trying to explain to that homeowner.
right?
I wouldn't get it transferred out, and there's no difference between here and this one.
And that's why we have the LOMA process. Where they can get a survey and basically see, am I at or above that base flood elevation?
Yeah, and that's the hard, that stuff in your position makes it really hard for buy-in, like, yeah, we get that, I always look for that, and we usually have an engineer go through and look at all the towns, just to make sure that. That the person who worked on it was considering that too. We really try to avoid that now. Any other questions? So keep using these maps, these are still your effective maps until
Yep.
ours go effective in 2006. Or 2026, potentially. You can, if you, you can adapt a city ordinance to start using the flood awareness areas, but you have to use every area in the effective plus the area in your flood awareness area, so it'll be more. If there's like but people do that potentially if there's some kind of development plan that will be in the flood awareness area, that way you can force those people to build higher so that they don't have to buy flood insurance later. Or, kind of be hosed later.
I've been raised here, 65 years I've been here, and I know all these ponds. When I grew up, I never ever seen. All this has ponds, watershed dams, there's dams all over,
Mhm.
up above that exchanges water.
Yeah,
flow.
there's a lot of dams in this area. It's bonkers,
Is
like,
that part of this too? Is
Yep.
that part of FEMA?
yeah, so,
Watch, when I grew up, when I was a kid, all spring long with floodwater and steamer. We played it all spring long. Now, we never do.
so we look at it, there's certain criteria that we use if it affects the 100-year flow. For a lot of them, the water is going so fast and so high that it just kind of rolls right over the dam in a 100-year flood. And that's what we're looking at. But we do an analysis on all of the dams that drain more than a square mile that we have with our dam safety division, which is, there are a lot in this area. I did them.
My dad built it. I was there.
So we actually go through and we look at the plan and we look at the spillway, we look at the emergency auxiliary spillway, everything, and we try to determine what the elevation behind the dam would be, or if it just blows through the dam like a speed bump.
Well, there's a lot.
There are, believe me. You don't have to tell me.
Good thing though, that's happened. We have water flow almost year round now. It used to be, come July, August, September, there's more weeds in the ditch and the creeks and banks. Now we have water flow all year round because it's regulated to just,
Yeah,
it can drain out of the pond and keeps flowing. It's pretty nice.
sure. Yeah, and if one does provide flood protection with our criteria, then we will add it. And if you have something that you think is providing a flood protection for your community, we can certainly look into that and see how we can include that in the map or whatever. We have some funding to do a little special projects every once in a while, so.
Well, I know they built a road up on between the town and the creek a lot, so that protects our town. That lot.
Yeah,
It's over that.
and that will be reflected, as long as the road was built before 2018, that will be reflected in our elevation maps. And that does happen a lot, that something like that kind of isn't a levee, but kind of acts like a levee.
Non-levy structure.
Yeah,
It just had to work that way. They did it that way.
yeah. So we do consider that. I mean, it's part of with the LiDAR and everything. It usually sorts its way out, and then because we go through and look at all the data, it will be not taken into consideration like it would if it was a more detailed study, but it will be somewhat looked at, I guess. Anything else? All right,
We lied.
yeah, we did.
45 minutes.
I gotta go back to the office. I really don't care about that.
I'm retired, it's been a fun time.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for your presentation.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Good, good. You can always,
Hopefully I can remember to get to Sue.
well, if something comes up, she can call us too, or.
I'm sure she does.
She's got my number.
I know she does. I wish she